As you can see, we're starting a new series tonight. We're calling it A Stone of Hope. We're really looking at what it looks like for us to be a gospel movement here in our city. So we'll spend about a month, 4 weeks, just kind of unpacking why, what, how, who kind of questions. I'm really excited about that. And I'm just going to dive right in. I want to tell you a few stories just as we go along this evening. The first is about a kid, a young boy, growing up not too far from here in Atlanta. His name was Michael. He grew up in just a neat community here in Atlanta. It was a strong business community. The people there worked really hard to overcome some really difficult circumstances. To start their own businesses and really thrive together. That happened. It was also a neighborhood where some of the best musicians to ever walk the face of earth were in this neighborhood, like all the time, in and around this place. As well, education was really a big deal. 4 colleges sprang up within blocks of each other, just in this one little area. Faith played a big role in his life and in that community. His father was a preacher. His grandfather was a preacher, and they were pillars in that community for many, many years. It was the South, early 1900s, Atlanta. They were black. That was not an advantage. Right? They grew up with separate but very unequal opportunities for their children. Right? They grew up with commands to get to the back of the bus or get up at a shoe shop and move somewhere else because the white lady had to try on her heels. Right? They were an oppressed community as well. And yet, their little neighborhood called the Old Fourth Ward in downtown Atlanta thrived. The heart of the community is a road called, they called it Sweet Auburn. And back then they said, it was the richest black street in the world. It's inspiring to hear stories about what happened in and around that community back then. It sounds like a really vibrant, warm type of place, the type of place you would want to move, plant roots, raise a family, live the good life, Thank goodness that was not this guy's focus in life, or we wouldn't have a story to talk about tonight. It was not their community's focus, just to live the good life. You may not realize it, but our lives in this room have actually been profoundly impacted by these people and the commitments they made a long time ago. It was really clear community was not enough. Community was not enough for them. I'll talk more about that in a moment. I want to tell you a little bit about my story as well. I mentioned a few weeks ago, if you were here, that I actually came to the gathering for a full year before anyone really talked to me, before I knew anybody. So I'll unpack that. By the way, if you feel like that right now, please come say hi afterwards, okay? Say hi to me or David or Jonathan or somebody. I would love to help get you connected around here. It's my job to help get you connected around here, okay? So don't just slip in and out silently like I used to, okay? We'd love to have you around. I moved to Atlanta in September of 2004. My pastor from home was friends with a guy who was on staff here years and years ago, and so he said, hey, if you end up anywhere close to Perimeter Church, you ought to check it out. Just so happened, I moved to Duluth. I was very close. I checked it out. I came to the old gym service, if any of you guys have been around that long, and then the gathering was on Wednesday nights back then, and so I started coming around then, and I came early, and by the way, that's how we know you're new. It's cool. Keep doing it. It's great. Came early, met a few folks. They were really nice to me, but really hardly ever saw them again, like for years. I don't know. Have you ever felt like a nobody? let me tell you, yeah, I felt like a nobody. A nobody from nowhere, small guy in a huge church in one of the largest metros in America. And I moved from West Virginia. You want to talk about culture shock? Right? I moved from this very comfortable existence where I was known. I grew up in this town. My band was like the most popular band in our little college town or whatever, right? My family lived really close by. I dated a girl for about 3 years that I thought probably would move toward marriage. So I came from that to, single, depressed, disconnected, and just kind of lost in a big city where I didn't get the culture and I didn't want to get the culture, honestly. I come from an area where there's a fair amount, a relative amount of poverty, and so there's just a sort of a general modesty about things like the car you drive or the house that you live in, to country club and luxury SUV world, right? Man, it was culture shock for sure. There's actually, I don't know if any of you guys see this, but there's a guy who drives a Maybach to Taco Mac. You know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what a Maybach is, there's Google. It's like a $500,000 car. So just kind of a, wow, whole new world, right? I went from a church where a huge Sunday was around 100 people to a church where a small Sunday is like 3,000 people, right? But I did keep coming. We'll kind of get to that in a moment, but I want to press pause for us just a moment and ask you to ask yourself the question, why have you kept coming so far? What has brought you here? What do you feel like you need? I think of like our music's good. It's great. There's lots of places that you can go sing and have great worship, right? David's a great speaker, but it's Atlanta. I mean, there are great communicators everywhere in this town, right? The gathering isn't even the place in this church where you could find the deepest teaching. I mean, we try to be challenging, but what is it that's drawing you here? Think about it just for a moment. I'm going to wager that the big reason, somehow or another, is tied to the same reason that I kept coming back, and it's community. Right? I bet it has something to do with this hunger we all kind of have for that deep, interconnected neighborhood type of feeling that I just described that this young man, Michael, grew up within in downtown Atlanta. And I think we all have this hunger because God placed that deep desire in us. God put it there. Why? I think it's because you were created by community for community. And that might sound odd since, like I said, community is not enough, but we'll get there. Right? God is a community, the perfect community. My friend and mentor, Matt Ballard, who was the young adults pastor here for a while, he used to love to say, a we created a you to be an us. If you happen to know him, he'd say it like this: a we created a you to be an us. He would love that. Tim Keller says it this way. I think we've got the quote up here. The Godhead is characterized by mutual self-giving love as the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit orbit around one another in a dance. The triune God is enjoying his own beauty, glory, power, character, together with the other members of the Trinity, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, constantly, eternally And something deep within us, I think, resonates with this and knows it to be true. But community is not enough. I mean, I think we know that too, on some level. Community is not enough because you were not created for the purpose of community. You're created and saved to enjoy Him. Chasing community gets our priorities out of order. Community is a context, not a calling. It's a product, right? Not a purpose. Even the reality of being brought into this dance, it only comes when we move from self-worship to worshiping Him, just as the quote continues. It's impossible for us to join in if we focus on ourselves. But through Jesus Christ, we can be, and His sacrificial death on the cross, we can be brought into the dance. So making Him Lord, making Him master of all of life, that's how we get community. It reminds me of another great Christian thinker and something that he said. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity, he said it this way. He said, if you aim at heaven, you get earth thrown in. Aim at earth, and you'll get neither. Aim at earth, aim at relational fulfillment, and you really get nothing. If we try to get satisfaction from experiences with other people, it's going to be painfully always coming up short. Right? Even really great experiences with really great, maybe Christian friends, it was just never meant to fulfill us. The community of girlfriend, boyfriend, fiance, wife, husband, same thing. It was never meant to fulfill us. You can't find life there, right? Aiming our lives at that, we're always going to come up empty. So almost a decade ago now, when I started coming around here, I had come up terribly, terribly empty. I had put all my stock in this relationship that had gone really ugly, really dramatic, really publicly. It was rough. I knew I needed to be around God's people, so I kept coming around. Eventually, clearly, I met some people. I made some friends, right? But I still kept coming up empty. I was still a little frustrated, a little angry, a little feeling like the community needed to change to give me what I needed. A lot of that started to change for me just as my aim sort of shifted over time. So what's that mean? What does it mean to aim at heaven? First, let's just get the thought out of our mind of heaven as, cloudy, happy, ethereal land, okay? Heaven is that place where God's kingdom is present in fullness. So to aim at heaven is really to point the trajectory of your life on the full rule of God over your life, when the kingdom is consummated one day. So that means we are to want God's kingdom. We're to want Him to rule. We are to desire to see the restoration of all things that His kingdom will bring in fullness one day. It also means that we work for His kingdom to come here and now. We're in the already but not yet. If you've been around Perimeter the last few months, you've probably heard that a fair amount, maybe more than you ever have in your life. I don't know. It just means that Jesus' kingdom began already, but is not here completely. Remember, there's two passages, several places in the Gospels, but we're going to look at them in Matthew. You probably have heard these plenty of times. But when Jesus began his ministry, he said, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand or has come near. Right? But he also said, teaching his disciples to pray, pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In other words, the kingdom has already begun. It has come near because the king showed up, right? But it is not yet come in fullness. Not yet has he made every knee to bow before him in submission, but it is coming. It is coming. Let me tell you another story. This is kind of funny. In the 1970s, on a small island in the Philippines, a man named Hiro Onoda was found hiding out in the jungles. Now, Onoda was a Japanese guerrilla soldier, okay? And he had been there upwards of 30 years, scavenging and hiding from search parties coming around on the island. He was stationed there during World War II. Somehow, the memo never got to him that the war was over. So he spent 29 plus years continuing to fight a war that ended clearly when the Allies won in 1945, right? He began the war in his 20s. They found him in the 1970s in his 50s, still fighting a war. Japan's economy and government had undergone a radical overhaul in that time. It wasn't even the same country anymore, right? It's sort of similar to a reality that is happening now. The war is over. Christ's death and resurrection have killed sin and death forever. He won the war. So you can either keep skirmishing against his rule, or you can join him in bringing his kingdom to bear in daily life, here and now. But I promise there's no middle. No such thing. All right, so we know the kingdom began. The kingdom is not yet consummated. Jesus told us one more thing about the kingdom, though. He said it's within you. Luke 17, 20 and 21, the Pharisees are kind of grilling Jesus about the kingdom, and they're sort of thinking end times type stuff. I love what Jesus says to him. He says, the kingdom does not come with your careful observation. Nor will anyone say, oh, here it is, there it is. Because the kingdom of God is within you. Whenever we embrace his rule and his reign, then he says the kingdom is there. So we're little embodiments of his kingdom. We're called to pray for his kingdom to come, for his will to be done on earth, here and now, the same way it is in the flawless community of never ceasing joy of God that is called heaven. We manifest the kingdom. We establish a beachhead of the kingdom in this world, like D-Day. If you remember the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, that's what was happening. Right? The Allied forces were landing on the beach, and they planted themselves right there and fought to defend that area until air support came in, right? That is what we are. Sorry, I've used some war metaphors. I've used a couple World War II metaphors, actually. So I think it's of note just to remind ourselves of this. Like, our battle is not with guns and ammo, right? Never get that confused. Never get that confused. Ephesians 6:12 says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, against the rulers, authorities, powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Our battle is not with people that we disagree with. Our battle is not with non-Christians. Our battle is not political. Absolutely not. Our battle is not with flesh and blood. It's against a very real spiritual enemy whose only desire is to defame the name of our God, and us along with him. Our battle is with one who spreads nothing but hate and jealousy and brokenness and sin in our world. Jesus defeated him. He will wipe out all of his evil one day. But right now, we beat back the effects of Satan's work, not by might, not by power, but by the Spirit of God. We are on a love offensive, all right? Our weaponry is the gospel. That passage in Ephesians 6, it goes on to talk about the full armor of God. It talks about truth and faith and righteousness that Christ gives to us. The gospel is the power of God in us and through us. It's God's grace to us, by the way, that Michael talked about earlier, grew up in a community that got this. Don't get me wrong, they weren't perfect. We would actually disagree with them on some pretty key theological points. We'd also agree with them on some places. And one place where they absolutely got it right was saying this gospel is not just a spiritual thing. There's not some divide between spiritual and physical, and the gospel's over here, and everything else is something else. A Presbyterian minister up in Nashville, a guy named Scotty Smith, who's an old friend of Randy, says it this way. He says, it's never just the gospel or just the kingdom. It's the gospel of the kingdom. Personal and cosmic renewal. And by the way, that quote is from Twitter. Old guys can tweet. Word. These guys understood that in their community. When Michael was very young, his father took a trip to Germany where the gospel had turned everything upside down about 450 years earlier. And when he was there, he decided he was going to change his name to honor that historical period, the Reformation, and the German pastor that really helped to usher it in. So he became Martin Luther King, and then his little son became Martin Luther King Jr. And these guys understood that Jesus' message was more than personal, that Jesus himself began preaching the gospel of the kingdom, not just some tract with a personal fire insurance prayer. The gospel about his transforming rule over all things. And just in case you're taking notes and like, oh, gospel of the kingdom, that sounds interesting. There's a few places just, again, in Matthew where that's brought up, so you can go peek at it and check it out. 4:23, 9:35, 24, 14. The civil rights movement was born out of this. Okay? There's actually it's a fairly academic book. It's called A Stone of Hope, like our series. And it just talked about how the civil rights movement was actually first a spiritual movement that had social and political consequences. It wasn't the other way around. It was not a political social movement that had spiritual aspects. It says, they could not have made it through the beatings, the imprisonments, the hardship of that time with their deep commitment to nonviolence without sort of the solidarity and the sacrifice that was built in them because of their grip on the gospel. This is the purpose you're created for. This is the purpose you're saved for, to bring the gospel to bear on your sphere, right? To bring the good news of Jesus' love to bear on all your relationships. To bring the gospel of his making all things new to your work. Right? To bring the gospel of the kingdom and the king to our culture. This is what we're called to. A Stone of Hope is not just a title randomly or a title from a book. You may recognize that it's a phrase that Dr. King uttered during his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. He actually he quoted Isaiah 40, verse 4 in that. It says, "Every valley shall be lifted up, every mountain and hill made low, and the uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places smooth," or a plain, as this version says. You may recognize John the Baptist quoted that passage as well, as he was preparing Israel for the Messiah to come, for Jesus. It's a vision of what Christ's kingdom will look like in fullness. When he goes on in his famous speech to talk about sort of his ideal, his vision, his dream in the future, he's really, whether he knew it or not, he's looking toward the fulfillment of Christ's coming. When Dr. King says he dreams of little black boys and little black girls joining hands with little white boys and little white girls as brothers and sisters, it really echoes the word speaking that every tribe, tongue, nation will bow in worship before him together. And he really called that community to take their faith and this mountain of despair that was their history, their collective history, to chip from it a stone of hope. The Bible would refer to that as an Ebenezer, right? A stone, a monument to God's faithfulness amidst a hellish reality. So Jesus is truly our stone of hope, right? The stone that the builders that we rejected has become our very life. And now our lives are a stone, a monument of his grace and faithfulness to a watching world. And that kind of brings us full circle on my story as well. Through some healthy, deep community with just a handful of guys, I really began to have some healing in some just deep, ugly, wounded places where I have been looking to relationship for life instead of the good news of Christ. And really at that point, I knew I wanted my life to become all about passing that on, whatever amount that I could pass on, just some healing, some tools that I had been given. I really wanted to do that. And God is hilarious in that, he kind of opened a few doors and changed some things in my heart, and now I have the great pleasure of leading this community. And it's sweet. It's really fun. Most of you have begun coming within the last year, few months or so. Those of you who were around last year can vouch for this with me. You would not recognize the gathering a year ago to what it is right now. It was very different. I'm going to be honest with you, it was not fun. It wasn't. But I began to get together with just our core leadership team. And we really just started hashing out, why are we here? What are we doing? Let's talk about this together. And I really facilitated, they shaped it. Because I don't dictate what happens here. That is not my job. We really, as a church, we believe the point of the church is really to equip God's people to do the work of ministry. I don't know if you've thought of it this way or not, but if you belong to Jesus, you're in ministry, whether you're getting a paycheck or not. It's not really my job to do ministry so much as it is to come alongside you, to coach, support, to delegate, to help put some tools in your hands so that we go do this together. And so that's really what we came to together. We said, community's not enough. We think we are called to be a movement bringing Atlanta's 20-somethings into an encounter with the gospel. So we're going to spend really just the next few weeks unpacking that. I got to be honest, we kind of covered the why tonight because God's called us to this together. I would just stand up here and give the next 3 talks. This is the kind of stuff that fires me up. But, bummer, you've got to wait for David to come back. And David's going to really talk about next week more of what's it mean to be a gospel movement. Before I close, let me give us a challenge, though. I'd like for y'all to do one thing every day this week. It's simple, very simple. Would you pray a sentence prayer every day this week? Maybe when you wake up, maybe you have a time that you pray, that would just be the easiest time to do it. Set a little calendar alert for yourself on your iPhone, smartphone, whatever you got, right? As a matter of fact, would you even do that right now? Set an alarm for yourself every day for the next week to pray this one sentence prayer that's very, very simple. It's on the screen. Maybe you can read it, maybe you can't. I'll read it to you. Lord, will you show me where I am looking for life in community or relationships instead of aiming for heaven? And I don't care if you get the exact words or syntax on that, okay? Pray it however you want. Just ask God to show that to you. Because I think we all do this. I think every one of us does this, right? And I think God will be faithful to reveal this to us if we're bold enough to ask him. And as we walk along and kind of unpack, what would it look like to do this? And as he's revealed some things to us about where we're looking for life elsewhere, I think we'll really be able as a community to aim our lives together at his kingdom. So let's try it this week. Let me pray for us before we worship again.